Okay, so we're back. It's John, Riley, Nolan here. We're gonna be going over the Vancouver Canucks situation here, the Elias Pettersson and JT Miller drama, and yeah, we're gonna be talking about what we think should happen there because it seems like it's kind of coming to a crossroad here, and one of them might be on the move sooner rather than later. So yeah, John, what do you think about the whole situation?
Yeah, I think there's so many layers to hear to see what's going on. And I mean, I know we'll talk about kind of other teams and situations right now. To me, it's like the Canucks are actually in the most positive situation in terms of like their play and what they could do this year. And just like talking to different Canucks fans, like they actually feel like there's something to build on here, at least for the on ice performance. And then there's like the conversation of what's being said and happening off ice. So yeah, it's interesting for the Pettersson versus Miller, like two very different players, two players that are different stages of their career. Like Pettersson's gone through his growing pains, but we always forget how young Pettersson still is. Like he's only 26 versus JT Miller, who's 31. And at the end of the day, like JT Miller with the New York Rangers 4, 5, 6 years ago, like was more so like a third line guy, a little bit of a checking guy, and now he's become one of the better scorers and point producers in the league. So I think we forget that sometimes that like Pettersson also like whether it was his development stage, like when he was playing over in Sweden, like there's guys that were like well above him in terms of power play, in terms of lineup. Like Pettersson had, I would have to look at the numbers, but like something along the lines of like 10 points in 40 games or something like that in the Swedish Elite League or even overseas. And he just never was like that guy. So when he came to even when he was drafted by Vancouver, you also have to remember like fans were like outraged, thinking it was just like some Joe Schmo and like just an absolute bum pick, and that it was a bust of a pick, and they should have picked like hate exposing my good buddy Mitch, but like and Velarde looks awesome now, so it's not that bad of a take as it used to be, like when Velarde was struggling in LA. But I mean, a lot of fans wanted Velarde like 10 times out of 10 times over Elias Pettersson, so you have to like remember things like that. So to wrap up in terms of where we're at right now, the Canucks are in a great spot. And you have other teams that are in these conversations of trading star players or trading, whether it's like the Buffalo Sabres we've talked about, the New York Rangers who have gone on a steep downhill, the Nashville Predators who we all thought were going to go on a deep playoff run this year are at the basement of the National Hockey League. The Canucks are actually in a great spot, but have two of their best players in crosshairs. So I think for me, it's a really interesting situation. But if I'm Vancouver, and you've already had this player uncomfortable or at least I would say on edge about the trade rumors. I mean, it was no secret that there was like trade talks and heavy trade talks between the Carolina Hurricanes and Canucks regarding Pettersson. That happened. And it's happening again even after the extension of Elias Pettersson. So where I'm at right now is if it's going to continue to be this way and Pettersson and Miller are not going to see eye to eye, you have to decide one, if JT Miller is part of your plans, and if you can re-sign Brock Besser, it likely means you're trading Elias Pettersson, and you have to get a value guy back. And I know Riley, we've talked about Dylan Cousins, but a guy like that, so you can still have that 1-2 punch with JT Miller and a guy that maybe can see more eye to eye with one of your better players. Riley,
I'd like to jump in. Yeah. I think these two players are like so huge, like stars in the NHL and their contracts are relatively large too, that this is a move that I don't see happening in season. I think, especially with how well they're playing, this is something that it's like, hey guys, like you guys got to suck it up for the rest of this year. Let's get through this. Let's look for a cup together, and then maybe disband them in the off season, like you said, when you're looking to extend Besser, which I think we all know you can't have both. You can't have all three guys. Um, but yeah, so it's something that definitely they're gonna have to work through. It must be something so like there must be some serious hate between these guys that it's getting out. Like in every dressing room I've ever been, there's been two guys that didn't like each other, but not to the point where like everybody's parents knew about it and all this stuff and like um the coaches really knew. Like it's pretty insane to me that these two guys don't like each other enough that all the media knows about it, all the past coaches know about it. Like it's getting out now. It's coming to a head. Like, what? How do two players hate each other that much? I just don't understand that
yeah,
portion of it because like we've all been around teams that maybe you don't like a guy or whatever. So, it must be something bad enough where it has to happen. I just don't see it happening until the off season. But yeah, like you said, like you got to get somebody who's going to fill in for one of those two guys as a top six center.
I was also going to just jump on that and say the more interesting part for me is that when you just talked about the media there is like, so in any media market, and I'll reference Toronto because it's always easy to reference Toronto, you'll have like your Steve Simmons of the world or all these guys who like will criticize the players or their articles or even when they're interviewing the players, it's kind of like that the shade and the shadow over these guys that obviously will criticize these players throughout the year. But like a guy like Rick Dhaliwal, and I know you watched the clip, Riley, like Dhaliwal is
Yeah.
so pro Vancouver and pro players. Like they'll have players on in the offseason and guys that are even from Vancouver that might not even play for the Canucks that they'll
Hmm.
have him on the podcast. So you know it's really bad when Rick Dhaliwal and that show and those kind of guys are talking openly about a situation like this. That's how you know it's not a bunch of rubbish or just media attention stuff or just talking out of your behind. It's happening. It's happening in the market. It's happening in the environment to the point where guys like that are talking about it. And regardless of it's being exaggerated or not, it's to the point where Pettersson's not playing his best self. And at the same time, somehow elevates his game when JT Miller is missing. And then also in the same season where we're not going to make assumptions because we don't know and we'll leave a guy's personal life out of it. But it's like no one ever got an explanation on JT Miller's absence. So obviously there's going to be the conversations and assumptions from fans, regardless of how you feel about it. I don't agree with making assumptions about a personal life, but I mean, all of this has happened in one season, and there's already the stuff that's happened in previous seasons. Where there's smoke, there's usually
It's
fire.
it's very strange. And then you see on the power play last night, they're not even on the power play together. Like the two most offensively dynamic players, forwards on the team. Both of those guys are on the first line power play of any team that they're on, and you see them switching out for each other. They're not like
Quinn Hughes
what's
was
going
always going to
on
be
there?
on. Quinn Hughes was always going to be the captain of that team. There's no way they looked at one of those guys to figure it out with the other because
Yeah, and
it would have
like
been a power struggle.
both those guys are older than him, so it's like you look at them like, oh, maybe one of these guys gets a look, but it's so easily Quinn Hughes, and then I never even thought of that. Like, how did JT Miller? He's a vet. He's been around. Seems like the leader to the fans, anyways. Like you see them chanting JT Miller at like even like WWE events.
Yeah.
So he's like the
Well,
franchise
emotional leader.
leader. Yeah,
Yeah.
emotional leader of the
Hey,
team.
we just talked
Good
about again
call.
very different skill levels, but we just talked about what Barclay Goodrow is to the Rangers, right? So,
Hmm.
but it's weird, yeah, because I hear so many things that's like JT Miller, how valuable he is for certain guys in the room, but it's like, how is your room so split? And you have, and I don't even know if the room's split. Maybe it's just literally the two guys and it's an isolated situation. But you have Rick talking to your head coach. They actually look like the one of the more put together teams on the ice. That's the funny part about this whole situation is I look at other teams on the ice like again, sorry to reference your Sabres, Riley, but like I hear about all these things about like these Sabres like just being buddy buddy, great stuff, going out for drinks, whatever. And it's like the same for all these other teams. They're just dog water at the bottom of the standings. The Red Wings are
Yeah.
another actually the Red Wings are another great example. The Red Wings have so many of these buddies in the organization, and they're just dog water on the ice. And you have like this drama happening in Vancouver, and I see people making predictions that they think the Canucks are going to win the Stanley Cup. So I don't even know. Like I think it's actually
Yeah.
hilarious to be
I'm
honest.
just looking at it right now, and I find it unreal that Vancouver's 16, 9, and 6, 38 points. And they've had Miller out, missed what, 10 games. Demko's been out basically the entire year. This whole Patterson Miller spewed. I find it unreal that they're still staying afloat.
Yeah, and
Oh,
like they
100%.
lost
Yeah.
guys too, and like also again, if this was like the Toronto market too, Nolan, you just
Yeah.
know the Brock Besser like 1 year left thing would be like just such a distraction, right?
Yeah.
So I
Phil
don't know.
Hronek's out too.
Yeah, like they, it's crazy. I will say
Yeah.
though, on the when you're referencing Toronto, I feel like the Mitch Marner. I don't know if you like again. I'm not trying to make this a Toronto conversation, but Nola, just quickly, do you think? I feel like the Mitch Marner contract thing hasn't been as much of a conversation as I thought it would be.
Yeah, no, it's honestly been pretty quiet, and I kind of like that. Mitch has been seem he's doesn't seem to be bothered by it, which is good. Hasn't really
Yeah, and
brought it
it's.
up much, or
I mean,
just
and the
don't.
media is respecting the fact that he said he's not going to talk about it throughout the season. So
Yeah, yeah. No one's throwing any fire or fuel on the fire, whatever. He's been playing really good, and Yeah, just hopefully he doesn't go on a little skid here, and then they start bringing it up, and then
Yeah, well, that's
it's
what
more
I'm saying.
messy.
Relating it back to the Brock Besser thing, like that hasn't really been much of a conversation. It's been a little bit, but it's not like the guys are grilling him. The
Yeah.
Miller Pettersson thing, like there's just so many layers in Vancouver where you would think it's a disaster. And honestly, Canucks fans are used to disasters, so I don't know. I don't know. But I will say that if a Dylan Cousins Byram plus offer came along, I would seriously consider it if I was Vancouver. I do think that there's a scenario where Vancouver could build one of the better top fours in the West in a situation where you have Hughes, Ronick, Byram leading the way. And then Dylan Cousins would be the perfect number two behind. I mean, Riley, we were talking about it a few weeks ago. I thought it would maybe be a JT Miller for Cousins plus, but it seems like the Canucks are more favorable on JT Miller, and at least Rick Tocchet is more. I think that's actually the
That's the
driver for
key.
this. That is the driver for this. Is Rick Tocchet loves JT Miller, and maybe we're wrong. I'm wrong in saying that as a person, but as a player, that's a Rick Tocchet type of player. And I honestly I don't know. There was also
Yeah.
rumors to suggest that JT Miller talked back against Rick Tocchet, which I don't know if I believe that, but that was also floating around in the rumor mill. So if that's true, then anything I just said is a bunch of dog
Well,
shit. But
if you look at the Canucks organization, like who's making the calls, I know their owner actually a couple of years ago was under some scrutiny for getting in too deep with it, especially with how bad they were.
100%.
Um, but if you look at like who's like Jim Rutherford, old head, Alex, Rick
Patrick,
Tocchet.
yeah.
Yeah, Patrick Alvin. But for generally, Jim Rutherford's going to tell Patrick Alvin, in my opinion, what's going to.
100%, bro. I
And
honestly, I've been sorry to interrupt. I was just gonna say, I've been telling people this dynamic that's happening in Montreal is the same dynamic with Vancouver. I honestly think Alvin and Kent Hughes are just kind of like the faces of it. There's a
mhm.
lot of stuff happening behind the scenes there, and I think Rutherford really pulls the strings more so than Alvin.
Yeah, I feel like it's Alvin, Tocchet, and Rutherford sitting in a room, and like Alvin's like, yeah, okay, yeah, okay, like just taking everybody's
Because
opinion in
hey, Alvin's the
and
Swede.
going,
He
okay,
should he should be back in Pettersson. He's the Swede,
yeah.
right? Like he should be
But I
back in
don't think he
Petey.
has much of it. It just feels from the outside looking in that he doesn't have much of a say, especially when you add in that the owner likes to have a say as well. So I don't know. That's just me. I think it's two old heads, and they're gonna pick JT Miller over Elias Pettersson. That's my opinion, anyways.
Yeah. So obviously from like the outside looking in, we don't know what it's like inside the room. We don't know who's causing the problems and whatnot, who everyone likes more. But who would you guys trade just from like the outside view if you had to pick one?
I would trade JT Miller, and that's strictly based on age. And I just don't think these contracts just never typically age well. It's the last couple of years. You're like, man, how do we get rid of this guy? Do you have to dump a first round pick with him to get rid of him? I think during the duration of Pettersson's contract, you're never gonna have to look at him as a guy that you got to dump off or get negative value in a trade back or anything like that. I think just for asset management wise, there's no way you can keep JT Miller over Pettersson. But that's just me. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I was gonna say I actually think Vancouver has a really good opportunity to take advantage of, and this could probably segue into our next conversation, is I think the Canucks have a great opportunity to take advantage of the New York Rangers' current situation. And honestly, I think the way that other teams look at JT Miller and the way the Rangers look at JT Miller, especially after the fact that they traded him away when he didn't take off yet, like he was a late bloomer, and they just got to watch him just take off completely as a player in Vancouver. Obviously, he went from the Rangers to like I still can't believe he went from the Rangers to the Lightning. Like the
Hmm.
fact that he was on the Lightning and he was just like not talked about much as a player on Tampa and then went to Vancouver. And that's, I mean, it's definitely to be said. It's all about
That's
opportunity, right? It's all about opportunity. JT Miller was always
Yeah.
facing five or six other guys in New York and in Tampa that were ahead of him. He goes to
And
Vancouver. He's immediately one of the top two options.
what was the trade too? I think it was two first round picks for Miller. And Vancouver is still kind of in the rebuild. And I thought that was insane, giving up two firsts for Miller.
It was definitely
Sound
a first and something else. I don't, was it two first? I
yeah.
don't know. It was definitely a first round pick and something else. I do remember
Yeah.
Canucks fans were losing their mind that they traded a first for JT Miller, who was seen as a third line guy at the time. But
Yeah.
obviously they were quick to shut up about that because I mean he just went off. But you're right, like that Miller was part of like some aggressive trades. Like the fact that it was McDonough and Miller that went to Tampa, and then yeah, Miller to Vancouver for the first and whatever else it was. But yeah, I think for me also the other thing about the JT Miller thing is what are you looking at for value? So like if you could get Byram, Cousins, and a first for Pettersson, I'm doing that in a heartbeat if I'm Vancouver. Especially if you can re-sign Byram. I know Canucks fans might disagree with that, but I really think Cousins could turn it around. I think Byram's going to be a stud long term and a first round pick.
Two Western Canadian boys.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of
Yeah.
where my head's at. But the JT Miller thing, I think the Rangers are a perfect example of like if you called the Rangers and go, hey, what are you willing to give up? Is it a first, Mika, and another piece?
Dog, they're
Then,
giving up they're giving up Kreider, Mika, and a first in a heartbeat, I think.
well, I don't know. Like I said, I don't even know if the Rangers are going to trade Kreider. I think that was all baloney, but maybe now Kreider's individually turned
Well,
on the
I
Rangers a little
think
bit.
I think Zibanejad and Kreider both right now have negative trade value. I've seen Zibanejad people saying he just does not try anymore ever since he's had a kid and some other personal stuff. He just does not look like the same player. Like no intensity to his game. So he's got like what 6 years left to make an 8.5 or some insane
Yeah.
Yeah,
term.
there's some bad contracts out there. I mean, again, we're going to segue into the Rangers and Nashville here in a second. Like, that's another example of like I was saying to like try to get Zibanejad going on another team because I do think it's a Rangers thing, and I think it's like yeah, maybe it's his personal stuff with the kid and family too, but I think he needs a new reason to like really play hockey and maybe it's
hmm
with more of a fresh look to just be the guy. Like that's why I suggested Nashville for Zibanejad. I mean, Vancouver could be another option. Like maybe Zibanejad, Pettersson. Like I said, I always look at the nationality aspect. Maybe the two Swedes can figure it out. They're going to be uh, playing together in four nations, so I think that's a perspective for me. Is maybe Zibanejad just a new look. So for me, if it was a trade with either Nashville or Vancouver for the Rangers, I would see Mika going the other way for value. I don't, what I think versus what I would do is very different. Like I said, I would sell high on the JT Miller value if you're Vancouver, if you have to trade one of the guys. Like I'm just saying, if you have to trade one of them, I would sell high on the JT Miller value because I can tell you right now for free, the JT Miller value right now is 10 times more than it's going to be in 2 years. And I think like right now, JT Miller, you could get the sun, the moon, the stars. You can get a first round pick. You could probably get Brendan Othman from the Rangers. You could probably get another prospect. You get Mika. You could get more. That's how valuable JT Miller is seen in the eyes of the executives in the National Hockey League right now. And if you're Canucks fans, like, why wouldn't you want something like that? Because at the end of the day, the Canucks still have to go through the Edmontons, the Colorados, the Vegas of the world. Like, it's still going to be a tough road to go to the Stanley Cup final. So why wouldn't you want to build and at least get the most value from a situation versus, again, the Pettersson situation could just keep getting worse. And I mean, we're
I,
talking about a guy like Mika who's just losing interest in hockey. I get that vibes from Pettersson. If this situation keeps going on and on and on, Pettersson would be the guy to check out for me. And it goes back to the Byram and Cousins trade from Elliot Friedman. Maybe that's a scenario for Vancouver where you get out of the situation and you get two valuable players in two valuable positions. So
just to like quickly comment on it, I think Vancouver's prospect base, if I'm not mistaken, is not very great, just because they've traded those picks and
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
for JT Miller and stuff like that. So, like you said, like imagine 2 or 3 years from now, and they got rid of Pettersson instead of Miller, and you got a 34-year-old Miller and nobody really to replace Patterson.
Yeah.
And then imagine the flip side where because you look at the guys they've traded or picks and stuff, even for Ekman Larson and stuff, like they could have had Gunther on their team. They could have
So,
had
bro, that's crazy. High mind hive Riley 100%. That's what I was literally thinking in my head. I was like, how have Canucks fans not learned that fast tracking a Stanley Cup champion team is not the way to go? And again,
hmm
are we suggesting trading Miller or Pettersson at all if this situation is not the way it is? No.
no,
There's no
no.
way, but it is what it is. So you have to figure it out. So are you trading the 26-year-old top 20 center in the league, or are you trading the 31-year-old? who's going
Yeah,
to be 32 in March. Like that's why I'm like in 2 years from now, JT Miller's going to be 34 years old. His value is never going to be as high as it is right now. So for me,
100%.
I think it's silly to trade an Elias Pettersson unless I already told you, unless you're getting the sun, the moon, the stars from the Buffalo Sabres, which I mean my trade offer was pretty aggressive, but I
Oh,
think
buddy, we'd give the Sun. Well, I would if I was the GM. Kevin
What,
Adams doesn't seem to want to give the Sun and the Moon for anybody. So
what about what about JT Miller to the Islanders? Get Bo Horvat back and 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 more.
Imagine. Imagine. That'd be ironic because apparently like Horvat and Miller butted heads all the time. But I don't know. I actually all these stories coming up, it could be a bunch of baloney. Like you know what,
Yeah.
Riley? This is getting way off topic, but ever since the Shohei Ohtani stuff with the Blue Jays, no one can believe anything anymore. Like I could be a Joe
oh yeah.
Schmo. Like Riley, seriously, this is real stuff. I could be the biggest Joe Schmo ever, but I could go up to like a legit fan page or like a legit YouTuber or a legit person that has like 50K on Twitter and be like, hey, my uncle is second cousins with the general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, and rumor has it, Elias Pettersson and Brock Besser just got in a fist fight in the locker room.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
All of a sudden, boom, 1,000K or 100,000 likes on Twitter,
Oh,
and
because
just
people eat that up on
yeah,
Twitter. It's like if I tweeted out like, "Oh, I work for the Brantford Bulldogs," and like a player on the team like did this crazy like,
yeah,
yeah, I work for the team, but I shoveled out. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
there's
yeah.
guys like that. It's like, oh, I swept the locker room in Vancouver, and JT Miller and Pettersson wouldn't even look at each other. It's like,
Yeah, so there is a lot of that. That's probably just like a bunch of baloney that's in the air, but there is some truth to this. So